monthly podcast. I'm Jim Ludes, Executive Director, joined today by our newest adjunct fellow and a good friend, Scott Bates. Scott, thank you for being with us today.
Well, it's great to be with you, Jim. Thanks.
Scott, you've got one of the best resumes I've ever seen.
It's either I can't hold a job or I have a lot of interests.
Well, I pulled up LinkedIn this morning just to take a quick look and refresh my memory. And most of what you've done isn't up there. You only go back 10 years, and there's so much that you've done before. And so for folks who are listening, Scott is currently the executive director of the Connecticut Institute for the 21st Century. He's a senior advisor at the National Democratic Institute. He was the president of the Center for National Policy, a think tank in Washington, D.C. He was a senior advisor in the House Homeland Security Committee. He's taught at a number of places. He was the Secretary of State of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
That's a big difference, the Commonwealth.
I had to correct myself there.
Yes, well done.
It's a remarkable career, and we're thrilled now that you're also going to lend some time and some talents to the Pell Center. So welcome aboard.
Well, thank you.
One of the things that really intrigues me about your career is this, you're working at three levels of public service. You're working at the local level. I didn't mention the service that you do in your home in Connecticut, but you're working at the local level. You've worked at the national level, and you continue to work at the national level, and you continue to work at the international level. Is there a common thread that runs between those different levels of public service?
Well, I think so. I grew up in eastern Connecticut. My dad was in the Coast Guard, and I remember thinking that the highest level of service you could do was to do something like he did, which was to be in the Coast Guard. And then I realized fairly early on I'd make a pretty, not a great soldier, sailor, airman. It takes a certain level of discipline maybe I didn't have, but I still was committed to making our country a better place, making our world a safer place. And what you realize at a local level when you're engaged, so I've been a town councilman, I've been police commissioner in my hometown, for example, is that you can actually have a difference, make a difference, have an impact by engaging people and getting right into the heart of issues. Then I realized I could do that at a state level. I worked for the governor of Virginia at a very early age, and working with somebody who is committed to a certain way forward. For example, we appointed more women and minorities to state positions than had ever been done in the entire history of Virginia. We basically doubled the figure. A person with a direction can do that, and an electoral mandate. And so I saw the art of the possible very early on in my career. And so it's really two things. One is to try to make a difference wherever you can, whatever level you're at. And then the other one, and it's emerging to my mind now with the rise of Trump and other things, is the belief that democracy is a very hands-on, engaging process. You've got to be involved at whatever level, wherever you are, to make it work. And so that's just the ethic that I've had throughout my life.
And so the types of things that you do for NDI overseas, these are capacity building, civil society building. What have you been working on?
Sure. So National Democratic Institute is a great nonprofit that's been around for about 30 years now. And a lot of it is peer-to-peer. So, for example, I was an old campaign manager on Democratic campaigns ages ago, and so I got to go over to Slovakia in the year 2000 and work with press secretaries on campaigns and talk about different techniques. Then later in Kosovo, I got to work with their members of parliament when they were setting up parliament for the first time in Kosovo, because I'd worked in a legislature in Virginia. So a lot of it is nuts and bolts. And then while you're doing that, there's a lot of exchange of ideas. And then I've worked in the Persian Gulf with NDI. And there it was more like working, let's say, with the Bahraini parliament with the finance committee. And I would say, look, here are 5 different ways around the world where finance committees and parliament work and how they work. And I'd bring in somebody from Morocco and somebody from Germany. I can say I learned a lot too. And for example, I was in Qatar working with NDI, and they have a method of campaigning. They call it the tent. You basically invite everybody in the village to a tent, and being Qatar, they give out TVs and other things. Well, look, I was running for town council in Stonington, Connecticut, the same time. So I had this odd life where I would fly to Qatar and Bahrain for 10 days every couple months, then I'd come home. and I would campaign for town council. So I took their idea, and I
held giving away television.
I wish, but I gave away cookies and tea, and we invited everybody in the town. And nobody had kind of done that, believe it or not. And so I went back to Qatar, and I was speaking with them, and I told one of the people I'd worked with about this experience and that I'd actually won office. So he was very proud, and I love seeing this in a tent full of Arabs who we were talking about. Democratic capacity building. This guy says, "Mr. Bates, used our campaign techniques." Yeah. And he said, "How did you do?" And I said, "I won," and they all kind of cheered. Yeah. So look, we learned from each other.
So I'm curious. So your career is really interesting in that it sort of spans an arc of time, Cold War, post-Cold War, when Francis Fukuyama was talking about the end of history and the explosion of democracies around the planet, and now since 2000, 2001, there's been a slow recession in the progress of democratic ideals and institutions around the world. You look at what's happened in Russia. You look at a number of other places around the world. You look at sort of the fate so far of the Arab Spring. Where, as you look at the international world, are you an optimist about the progress of democracy? Where do you think we are in this moment?
I'll give you a yes, but I am an optimist. However, nothing is predetermined. And I think, coming up in the 80s and 90s, so the triumph over the Soviet Union and its authoritarian system, to me, was a kind of reinforcement that the American way and democratic forces were on the march. This was the tide of history, reinforced, of course, by gains in Eastern Europe. And then I was in the Balkans, as you mentioned, working on democracy assistance projects there, and in Kosovo, where international cooperation actually stopped a genocide by selective use of force, same in Bosnia, and then, through a very unwieldy but massive international effort, kind of kept the peace. I mean, there hasn't been violence there in 15 years. And I was part of an international team. The U.S. was only contributing 15% of that. The rest was OSCE, it was NATO, it was a raft of international partners. It worked. And so that's what I saw happening. Yes, that leads one to become optimistic. But I can say, Jim, a couple things temper that optimism. I was in Budapest, Hungary, just a few weeks ago, working with some of their security staff about how to respond to the refugee crisis, how to respond to security threats as they perceive them. And I looked out on a castle that overlooks Budapest, and I thought, gee, that castle's only 150 years old, but it's seen like 5 regimes. And in the 90s, I guess I thought everything was onward and upward. And now more than ever, I believe, democratic progress at home and abroad is a really hard slog, and you have to tough it out every day. And sometimes just holding your ground is a great victory.
So let's talk a little bit about where the democratic moment here domestically right now. You are a veteran of domestic politics as well as international politics. What do you make of this moment in the rise of Trump and the sort of the civil war within the Democratic Party right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, barrels of ink have been spilled on this, and just thinking what I can add light onto this, it's kind of surprising that this movement hasn't happened yet. It should have arisen after 2008. Everything should have been called into question. That, in a globalized economy, the economy is not working for a lot of people. So we have.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Do you see Trump and Sanders as two sides of the same coin in that respect? That they're both reacting to globalism.
Yes, absolutely.
The pressure that's put on American society.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think so. I think people that are following both of those fellows, they view it as a movement they're part of. They are against the existing order, and they are highly skeptical of American global engagement.
So how did we get here?
How did we get here? I think 25 years of having about 30% of the population not benefiting from what's going on out there. So, and there's ways we can fix this, because I'm interested in solutions. And one is, for example, for every $100 worth of benefit from international trade, it's been estimated that we spend about $1 on worker retraining. So we really have to reorder that. In other words, there are winners and losers in trade. In an aggregate, America's a winner, but explain that to people that are losing their jobs and don't have a way forward. So we absolutely have to reach out to those people that are the losers in a globalized society. And it's just that's one answer. I think the other is we have to continually connect. And this is a challenge for the foreign policy establishment. You and I have worked in Washington. I was increasingly frustrated telling people. I remember going to a dinner at the British Embassy, and they were all, theorizing about the solution to the Syrian civil war. This is 3 years ago. And I said, that shouldn't be the topic of your next conversation. It should be, how come we're losing our publics? Because the British Parliament voted against, bombing Assad after he used chemical weapons. And there was no political will here to do it either. And I said, look, that's a problem. So we have to explain over and over why global engagement works for the American people.
So I've looked at this a little bit, and I increasingly come back to education.
Yes.
And, you see this, we're here on the campus of Silver Regina University, and we see this frequently in freshmen who, last time they took a history or social studies class was their sophomore year of high school. Mm-hmm. It's not a priority in a lot of school districts because of high-stakes testing and other priorities. And it's to our detriment as a society. If you believe that schools exist to help educate one generation to the next, the ideals, the values, the things that are important, if all you're focused on is STEM,
right,
you're going to lose some of that.
Yeah, democracy, I think Thomas Jefferson said the foundation of any democracy is an educated populace. And I would add to that an engaged populace. You can't outsource democracy to a strong man, somebody with simple answers, or, technocrats. I mean, John Q. Public has to get involved and engaged and pay attention.
And those are the two sort of the alarming threads that I see is sort of the rise of Trumpism on the right. But on the left, there's also a rise of sort of an authoritarian technocracy, right, where the technocrats have the answers, and it doesn't matter what the public says. But in both those scenarios, you combine that with some populist appeals, and you wind up with something dangerous and scary very fast.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing right now. You can look in every Western society. You can look at Austria, which just had its presidential election and barely turned back a right-wing, simple answers kind of guy. And you're seeing it in the Brexit vote in Britain. So it's not just the U.S. It's every society is facing this fundamental tension, which is, technology has shrunk time and space. We are more interconnected than ever, but it is incredibly disruptive to social order, to individual lives. And those that thrive in that environment are going to do well, but there are a lot of people that don't. And those of us that thrive need to be very aware that a lot of people don't, that a lot of people are scared. I don't think Trump supporters would think they're scared, but I think essentially Donald Trump is afraid of the world. Yeah. He is afraid of an interconnected world. He doesn't know what to do, and it's reflected in his arbitrary pronouncements that don't really have any kind of actual coherence.
So if you were, and I'm not asking you who you're supporting in this cycle, but if you were, if you had the ear of the Democratic nominee, whoever that may turn out to be, what advice would you give them to?
Sure.
To engage in this
dialogue?
Well,
I'll sum it up with about 2 years ago, I was asked by some of the National Security Council staff. They were developing their national strategy for the United States, and they had some great ideas about the global youth movement and Southeast Asian youth leaders and all of this. And, it's all upside and rainbows. And I just said, listen, the president today is in Galesburg, Illinois, talking about middle-class jobs. I suggest that be the foundation of what you talk about, how America can win in a globalized economy, the steps we need to take, and those include, certain kinds of trade agreements, military alliances that benefit us. We have to explain it through that lens. The American people are not convinced that this world is working for them. And if it isn't, and there are some aspects that aren't, then we need policy prescriptions for that. So being honest with people, not running away. I think, something like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that can work if workers and unions are convinced that there is some real worker retraining and that they're going to benefit from this.
One of the things that I've often wondered about is, the history of globalization is pretty clear in terms of the post-World War II moment and the desire to create a global free trade system because of the fundamental belief that countries that trade together would be less likely to go to war, and we can parse that to death. But one of the things that we have walked away from in our foreign policy tool is the promotion of unions abroad. And if globalization is predicated on free trade, part of that means that there has to be truly free labor, but free labor that has the ability to organize in every country.
Well, that's exactly right, because if you look at it, what globalization has effectively done, it's made capital global and labor markets global. And so that means the power of labor in each domestic economy is radically reduced, their bargaining power.
But I think the idea of the labor movement in this country has become so politically toxic, and I like to remind some of my more conservative friends that it was a labor union in the shipyard in Gdansk, Poland, that changed the world in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And the fact that the United States is not actively promoting labor unions today abroad, particularly in economic competitors where the price of labor is so greatly deflated compared to the United States, just seems to be a lost policy opportunity.
Well, I think you're right. There's one other thing that comes to mind, and you mentioned, so that would be my advice to the future president, whoever she is. And I think the other thing I'd mention, I was driving in here today and heard a fellow on the radio. His name was DePietro. Can I say that?
Yeah.
And he was going on making fun of immigrants who have moved to Providence. He said, you go to some sections of Providence and, they're not even speaking English. And I'm thinking, DePietro. Yeah, no kidding. Like 2 generations, that was you and your family.
Right.
So, a little bit of like basic decency and a little bit of historic sense of awareness are important for us in understanding that e pluribus unum, right? Yeah. Together, united, we're stronger. Yeah. And the worst thing we can do is divide into small groups like they did in Yugoslavia.
Together united, we're stronger sounds like a hell of a campaign slogan.
Hey,
I'm just going to put that out there.
There we go. I like it.
We're running out of time, but I do want to take a moment because you did spend a part of your career very actively engaged in homeland security, and so I want to just take a couple of minutes to talk with you about where we are, both internationally and domestically, in terms of the threat. After 9/11, the United States made it its top national security priority to destroy the central core of Al Qaeda, and I think you could make a reasonably compelling case that that's mission accomplished. But the ideology that fueled Al Qaeda is stronger and spread more across the globe than it was certainly prior to 9/11 and certainly prior to America's invasion of Iraq. So with the rise of groups like ISIS, with homegrown terrorism, where are we in this struggle against extremism, and are we on the right path?
I think we are, Jim, and it is an unsatisfying conversation because after 9/11, we were all prone to using the template we had before in any existential. It seemed like an existential conflict. It's like World War II. They're evil. We're gonna defeat them, mobilize the entire nation. And the nation gets exhausted of that effort over time, especially when definition of victory is so amorphous. So, speaking with security officials in Eastern Europe, I said, look, let's be clear. The threat, because they were talking about amending a constitution, saying the threat of terrorism would allow them to suspend all civil liberties. I said, the threat is always here. It is always essentially low level. It is not an existential threat to our nations, only if we overreact to the extent that we cease being democracies. So it's hard because the American people, myself included, want total victory. We want clear answers. Look, we're going to have to live with this as an ongoing threat, but it cannot defeat us. It cannot even defeat our allies if we're partnered with them. And we have to proceed with, prudence when we're acting. So the carpet bombing of enemies would simply create more enemies. So I think the path of, special forces, drones, if we're talking about kinetic activities, is the right path, but even more human intelligence, even more understanding the cultures that and the allies we're operating with. It's a lot of language training, a lot of area studies. These are patriotic endeavors now. We have to be aware of the world around us. And as Americans, it's easy to not want to because we live in a pretty great place, but we have to really be engaged. So ironically, I think it's tempting to want to walk away from the Middle East. I think we have to be more engaged, but in very subtle and different ways. So I'm confident long term. I mean, I look back in the 1900s, there were anarchists who committed acts of terrorism. This is not a new phenomenon. And I think that how we're reacting to it, our homeland security infrastructure we've built up, while frustrating, has been relatively successful in the last 15 years. I would suggest it is inefficient, it is cumbersome, but it's generally working. And the only way we can be defeated is if we defeat ourselves by giving up on our values.
I think that's a powerful place to leave this today. Scott, it's always great to see you.
Thank you.
I think we could probably spend the rest of the day talking about some of these issues, but thank you for being with us today. Thrilled to have you as part of the Pell Center, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
See you soon, Jim. Thanks
so much.